Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello and welcome. This is Real Britain with me, Calvin Robinson, on TV, radio and online. Today we'll be discussing the persecution of Christians with millions under attack for following the name of Christ. Also, historic panels displaying Edward Colston have been replaced at a church in Bristol portraying Christ in a dinghy with immigrants. Was this inappropriate? And does the progressive left have a problem with black people being right-wing? But first, it's the news with Tamsin Roberts.
Calvin, thank you. Good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. It's 2 o'clock. The Prime Minister has acknowledged the government made mistakes in the handling of the mini-budget, but says she's standing by her tax-cutting plan. Just a warning of flash photography coming up. Speaking to the BBC Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg, Liz Truss defended the government's package and refused to rule out public spending cuts. Ms Truss also said the Cabinet was not informed in advance of plans to abolish the top rate of tax and that it was a decision taken by Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng. The Prime Minister's comments come as the Tory party conference gets underway in Birmingham today amid economic fallout from last week's financial announcement.
I do want to say to people, I understand their worries about what has happened this week, and I do stand by the package we announced, and I stand by the fact that we announced it quickly because we had to act. But I do accept we should have laid the ground better. I do accept that.
You accept you should have laid the ground better.
I have learnt from that. I have learnt from that, and I will make sure that in future we do a better job of laying the ground.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has refused to rule out real-term cuts in welfare payments, despite saying pensions would rise in line with inflation. Speaking in the same interview with the BBC, she was clear that she's committed to the triple lock, protecting them against price increases. Not ruling out a reverse on Boris Johnson's promise to maintain the raise in benefit payments in line with inflation, she said Work and Pensions Secretary Chloe Smith is looking at this. Merseyside police have charged a 34-year-old man with the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell. Thomas Cashman is accused of killing the 9-year-old who was shot in her home in Liverpool in August. Cashman has also been charged with the attempted murder of Olivia's mother and convicted burglar Joseph Nee, who was chased into her property. A second man, 40-year-old Paul Russell, has been charged with assisting an offender. Both men will appear at Liverpool Magistrates Court on Monday. FIFA's president has called it a dark day for football after 125 people died in a stampede at a match in Indonesia. Officers fired tear gas in an attempt to control crowds after supporters of the losing team invaded the pitch in the East Java province. In a panic, thousands surged towards the stadium's exits where many suffocated. An investigation has been launched and the country's president has ordered the league to be halted. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russian forces have retreated from the key eastern town of Lyman. A video shared online shows Ukrainian soldiers announcing the capture outside the town council. Hours before the retaking of the town, Russia's defence ministry announced it was pulling troops out of the area amid threats of encirclement. The capture came just a day after President Putin proclaimed the annexation of nearly a fifth of Ukraine. King Charles will not be attending next month's COP27 climate change summit in Egypt. It's understood that after seeking advice from the government, it was mutually agreed that it wouldn't be the right occasion for the king to make his first overseas visit as sovereign. Despite not attending the event in person, it's reported the king still hopes to contribute in some form. Meanwhile, the first official photograph of the King, the Queen Consort and the Prince and Princess of Wales has been released by Buckingham Palace. The picture was taken at the palace 10 days after the Queen's death as the King prepared to host a reception for world leaders. And more than 40,000 people have taken part in the London Marathon today. It's the third time the 26.2-mile race will take place in October after it was moved due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Organisers say it will return to its traditional spring slot next year. Congratulations to everybody who took part in the marathon. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Real Britain with Calvin.
Welcome to Real Britain. Here's what's coming up on the show this hour. We'll be shedding light on the persecution of millions of Christians across the world with the help of the charity Open Doors. Also, research has found almost half of young people aged between 8 and 17 have come across harmful content online, including material promoting self-harm and suicide. And following the comments made by Labour MP Rupa Huq calling Kwasi Kwarteng superficially black, I'm asking if the progressive left have an issue with black people who are right-wing. That's what we're talking about in the next hour. I'd love to know your thoughts on online safety. Do you think more could be done to protect our children from harmful content online? Tweet me at GBNews, or you can email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can watch us online too on YouTube. Stay tuned. Christianity is under attack. Open Doors watch list tells us nearly 6,000 Christians were murdered for their faith last year. Over 5,000 churches were attacked in the same year. Extremism and violence against Christians continues to rise. Since we handed Afghanistan to the Taliban, it has risen to number 1 in the list of most dangerous countries in the world to be a Christian. Christians are dying around the world, being tortured, imprisoned, persecuted in horrendous ways. And what are we doing about it? We're quick to take on board refugees from Islamic countries who may have conflicting values and could cause disruption in social cohesion. But would it not make sense to prioritise our brethren with shared values and beliefs? In my opinion, they'd find it easier to integrate. Whilst persecution is growing around the world, we enjoy many freedoms at home. We have the protection of religious freedom under the law, but that hasn't stopped intolerance from growing in the UK. Dr. Richard Scott, as an example, a British GP, was investigated by the General Medical Council for praying with his patients. Nigel and Sally Rowe, who I'll be talking to later, questioned their son's Church of England primary school around trans issues and were told that misgendering a child is considered transphobic behaviour. My friend, the Reverend Bernard Randall, was fired from his role as a chaplain at a Church of England school for telling pupils they had the right to decide for themselves what they thought about identity politics. Doctors decided it was in Archie Battersby's best interests to die when his family wanted to keep fighting for his life. Mayoral candidate Maureen Martin lost her job at a housing association for expressing Christian beliefs on marriage. Christy Higgs lost a job as a pastoral assistant in a school after sharing concerns on her private Facebook about the politically infested relationships and sex education, which many, including myself, believe has become politically infested. Dr. Dermot Kearney was investigated after providing emergency life-saving treatment to unborn babies for women who regretted taking the abortion pill. And Mary Onowa was pushed out of her long career as a nurse because she wore a cross necklace. Unfortunately, this list goes on, and I don't have time to go through them all, but it seems it's no longer socially acceptable in this Christian country to hold Christian views. Why are we so intolerant of Christians in the UK? It's interesting to see people who claim to promote tolerance, diversity, equality, and inclusion are more often than not the ones destroying our Christian heritage, from campaigning to remove historic monuments from our churches to renaming streets and schools. I experienced a glimpse of this firsthand recently. You may have noticed I wear Orthodox Anglican garb on a Sunday because I rushed to the TV studio straight from church. What's known as choir dress has been standard Anglican dress for hundreds of years. It's English clerical tradition, my uniform, if you will. A cassock, Geneva gown and preaching bands, topped up with a surplice and scarf whilst I'm actually preaching. Now, I received many messages of support last week celebrating such an open Christian witness on mainstream television. But the response I received from certain so-called liberal lefties was very telling. I won't name drop them for legal reasons, but popular authors and a certain Nigerian member of the royal family. Now, I am a good sport. I can take a joke as well as the next man, but this is nastiness meant to berate and humiliate. This is not jovial banter. It's the woke way. There's a heavy anti-Christian bias to a lot of this rhetoric. I highly doubt we'd see them attack an Orthodox Jewish rabbi's robes or imam's tunic. So as a Christian minister, I forgive them. They're ignorant, they know no better, Luke 23:34. But as a conservative commentator, I challenge them. Sure, ridicule Christian faith leaders. We live in a free country, which celebrates the freedom of expression. But be fair, be balanced with your satire. You've mocked Christianity, now do Islam. Open Doors research on worldwide Christian persecution reveals that 360 million Christians face oppression in countries around the globe, with its annual rankings of the top 50 most dangerous countries to worship Christ containing Afghanistan, North Korea, and Somalia. But many say the suffering of Jesus' followers around the world goes unreported by the mainstream media. With me now to discuss this is the CEO of Open Doors herself, Henrietta Blythe. First of all, Henrietta, thank you so much for joining us. What do these results tell us about Christian persecution worldwide?
Well, you're right, Calvin. Our research shows 360 million Christians around the world experiencing very high or severe levels of persecution and discrimination. We reckon that's 1 in 8 Christians. So you think about an average church in the UK, maybe has 80 members. That would mean 10 of them are experiencing severe discrimination as a result of their faith. And this can take the form, we talk about the smash and the squeeze. So the smash is the sort of thing that hits the headlines. You mentioned Afghanistan at number 1. We know that when the Taliban took over there, they started to hunt down Christians. We know that Christian men, if they were discovered, were often executed on the spot. Women could be subjected to sexual violence or trafficked. Some of the young Christian girls were married off to Taliban fighters as the spoils of war. That's the smash. The squeeze, which is much more common, is when Christians are denied access to the very things that make it possible to live a decent life. So Christians might lose their jobs or be denied access to healthcare or be unable to obtain government aid. We heard a lot about that during the COVID pandemic. So, for example, Kasem, a young man in Bangladesh, he converted to Christianity from Islam, and he started to meet with some of his friends to worship in his house. And when the village head discovered this, Qassem was excommunicated by the village. As a result, he's a daily labourer. And as a result, since then, he's been completely unable to find any work.
On your website that viewers can go and check out, and you rank countries around the world in levels of their persecution. The top 50, I believe, are mostly high, with about 11 being extremely high. What is the metric used there, and how do you gather those results?
So we gather the information from people on the ground, from the grassroots. We send out quite an extensive questionnaire. We ask people about personal right to belief, family life, church life, national life, whether they can talk publicly about their faith. We also look at violence against Christians. And then we take those results and we compare them to academic reports from the year, to reports produced by other organisations, reports in the media. And then all our data is triangulated independently by the International Institute on Religious Freedom. And that's how we compile the list of the 50 most dangerous countries for Christians.
That persecution is on the increase around the world. What can viewers and listeners at home do to help and support Christians abroad?
I think the first thing is to find out what's happening. I was really shocked when I took over as CEO of Open Doors here in the UK and Ireland. I had no idea of the extent to which my brothers and sisters around the world were being persecuted. So we need to find out. And as you say, there's lots of information on the Open Doors website about what's going on. I think we need to speak out about it as well. Do our MPs, for example, know what's going on? How are they influencing their peers in other countries? Freedom of religion of belief, after all, is a basic human right. There's also a lot we can do to provide practical support and to help people know they're not alone. So giving financially to charities like Open Doors can really help us help our brothers and sisters on the ground. And finally, of course, for those of us who have a faith, we can pray. And actually, Brother Andrew, who was the founder of Open Doors, who sadly died last week, he always said prayer is the real battle. And we know prayer makes a tremendous difference.
Here. I was going to ask you about Brother Andrew. We don't have a lot of time, but if people want to look him up, he was known as God's smuggler because he used to smuggle Bibles all around the world. Very good work. Could you end, Henrietta, on a prayer for Brother Andrew?
Yes. Lord, we thank you so much for the witness of Brother Andrew's life, for the amazing inspiration he was to so many of us, for the seeds he sowed, Lord, and for the way, even in the face of persecution, the church is growing around the world and our brothers and sisters are standing firm. We pray for his family, that you would comfort them, and we pray for those of us who are left, that we would continue to build on his legacy and strengthen your church where it faces the most severe persecution. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you very much. That was Henrietta Blythe, CEO of Open Doors. Look them up, they do some fantastic work. Now, the Conservative Party conference will officially be opened in Birmingham in just under 2 hours. I'm heading off there myself as soon as this show finishes. Joining us live from Birmingham is GB News political correspondent Catherine Forster. Catherine, who'll be speaking this afternoon? Who's going to kick things off?
So starting in just a couple of hours at 4 o'clock, Penny Mordaunt, leader of the House of Commons, will be opening the conference with tributes to the Queen. There will be a 1-minute silence. Then they will sing the national anthem. Of course, Labour did that last week and it went very, very well, didn't it? Then there will be delivering for more jobs some of the Metro mayors, Andy Street, Mayor of the West Midlands, of course, Jake Berry, Ben Houchen. But Obviously, there's a sense of anticipation. It's exciting. People arriving, a real hubbub. I hope you can hear me well. There's a lot of noise in the background. And it's a real melting pot of the great and the good. Wendy Morton, Chief Whip, just over my shoulder. But obviously, this conference is taking place against the backdrop of those quite horrific polls over the last few days for the Conservative Party, putting them between 20 and up to 33% behind Labour. That has been a dramatic worsening since Liz Truss came to be Prime Minister. Don't forget, it's 4 weeks tomorrow since she was announced as having won. And oh my goodness, how things have changed since then. So there is a lot of nervousness about the approach that's being adopted. There's a lot of people not here, a lot of the big beasts. Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak, he said that he wouldn't come, so he would give the chance for Liz Truss to own the moment, a spokesman said. Sajid Javid, also not here. Michael Gove is here. Now, he was on broadcast this morning and saying that he did not agree with the approach that the Prime Minister was taking, that it was not conservative. And already we are seeing a lot of division, specifically around the 45p top rate tax cuts. Quite a number of MPs are mobilising. They're working with Labour. They're seeing how they can stop this. Now, Jake Berry this morning was tweeting that anybody who voted against it would have the whip withdrawn. So certainly the Conservative Party gathering here with a noticeable number of people not here, but there is a lot of ill feeling and unhappiness already. So Liz Truss will be really hoping, I think, to build bridges, although this morning she was doubling down. The only admission really was that they could have handled it better in terms of the rollout, but certainly no backtracking coming from her or the Chancellor. So it'll be fascinating to see how this conference goes over the next few days.
Thank you very much, Catherine Forster, GB News political correspondent. We'll have more updates from the Conservative Party conference as the show goes on. Plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain. Next, an image of Jesus Christ on the rough seas in a life raft with refugees has won a design competition at a church in Bristol. But is it appropriate? First, let's take a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry for most with some clear spells, but there'll be a few showers in parts of western Scotland. Let's take a look at the details. Skies will be clear across the southwest England this evening, and it'll turn chilly in the countryside as temperatures fall into single figures. Any cloud in southeast England will gradually melt away to leave clear skies this evening. A few mist and fog patches could form in the countryside. Dry this evening in Wales and turning cold across the country. A little mist may form in the valleys as the evening progresses. Mist and fog patches are also possible across the Midlands, particularly in the east. It will be a dry end to the day with starry skies and feeling chilly out there too. A few late showers will move into northwest England this evening, but most places should stay dry. Skies will be clear across the northeast with light winds. There could be a few late showers across southwest Scotland towards the end of the day, but many places will be dry, particularly in the east, where skies will be clear. A cloudier picture across Northern Ireland this evening, although many places will be dry. There could be just a few light showers around coastal areas at the end of the day. Apart from a few showers in the northwest tonight, most places will stay dry. There'll be increasing amounts of cloud in the northwest and some lingering fog patches in the south. And that is how the weather is shaping up overnight and into tomorrow morning.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. Now, an image of Jesus Christ crossing the sea in a raft with refugees has won a design competition to replace 4 panels displaying the 17th century merchant Edward Colston. St Mary Redcliffe Church in Bristol launched the competition in May and had temporarily replaced the stained glass in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protest back in 2020. Around the same time, Colston's statue was torn down and thrown into the harbour. To discuss this further, we have Reverend James Treasure and Dr. Gavin Ashenden. Now, Reverend James, do you think this is a good idea?
Good afternoon. Nice to be with you. I mean, the first thing to note is that I live in God's promised land of Dudley in the heart of the Black Country, so I've got no links to Bristol other than my great auntie Margaret, who I feel is everyone's great auntie. So all I do know is something like that to happen in the Church of England, is a long process, and they consult all the stakeholders involved. So if you're not don't know the Anglican scene, the vicar can't wake up one day and say, I'm going to change these windows. You have to go through a whole process, consult the stakeholders. So after all of that process, if it's agreed, then yes, I think it's the right thing to do, and it would be a legal thing to do as well within our setup within the Church of England. So personally, yeah, I think it's a fantastic thing. I think the image is a very powerful image, and it really provokes us to think in a different way of perhaps where Christ is in certain situations.
Okay, thank you. Reverend James, interesting take. It's legal. A lot of stakeholders were consulted. Father Ashenden, is it biblical?
Well, so it could be biblical if you take certain parts of the Bible and apply them selectively. But the problem is it's not historical and it's not moral. And it's not biblical in the sense that ultimately the Bible has a different set of values. What it's doing is to use two leftish ideas. One is that our value is our collective identity. So refugees are all good, according to this narrative. And the other is that if anyone does anything wrong, they're all bad. And in this case, it's the rubbishing of Colston. Colston was a slaver. He made his money out of slave trading and a lot of other things. The reason he's famous in Bristol is because he gave all his money away. So the question is, do you look at his sin or do you look at his virtue? When I was a university student in Bristol, and I was very nearly sent to be a curate at St Mary Redcliffe, the real argument was over the Wills building, the Wills family, and tobacco, because it was thought, should we all study in a law library made out of money which came from being invested in tobacco? And the same thing was true then as now. Money itself is not corrupt, nor are rich people necessarily corrupt. You have to take a different, much more morally complex view. So Colston should not be judged by the standards of today. There was a huge argument about the wording of the plaque. One of the authors in Bristol Library wanted to turn it all down and say that Colston got made his money out of black slave traders. It was the black Africans who were collecting the slaves to selling them to white people. So it doesn't tell the truth about slavery. It doesn't tell the truth about Christian anthropology. It doesn't tell the truth about group identity. It's a piece of leftish propaganda. Christ is not in every single dinghy bringing illegal refugees who are economic migrants from France across to this country.
That's the good point, because I think we've spoken enough about Colston over the past year or two. I really want to get into this idea that Christ was in the dinghy with the refugees. Reverend James, do you not think this might encourage the crime, the people smuggling, and the immoral attitudes of people jumping into a dinghy in order to get into Britain rather than going the appropriate legal routes?
Yeah, I can understand that questioning and those reservations. I don't think a stained glass window in Bristol will do that. I think there's lots of other triggers that make people want to come to the UK and are involved in the sort of illegal trafficking of people and so on. So I don't think a stained glass window does that, no.
Is it in line with Scripture? I want to refer to the idea that borders are scriptural, that the idea that we have a nation state is scriptural. All of these things seem to be getting erased by members of the left at the moment, this idea that we should have open borders and anyone should be able to go wherever they like. If we refer to Deuteronomy 32:8, when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of man, he set the boundaries of the peoples. Is this not something we should be talking more about, Reverend James?
I don't know, to be honest with you, Calvin. I wouldn't sort of base too much of my whole theology on Deuteronomy chapter 32. Though as beautiful
okay, then we can go to Acts 17:26
cool.
instead, if you like. He made from one every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined their appointed times and the boundaries of their habitation. We can go to several places in Scripture if you don't like one particular part, but surely the idea behind it is that nations are important because they are scriptural.
Yeah, nations are important in Scripture. And what the beautiful thing is, isn't it, in the book of Revelation, is when all the nations come together and worship God, their Saviour and Creator. So
in the end times,
that's the image.
Okay, Father Ashington, what's your take on that?
Well, of course, one single stained window won't change a political climate, but it's sad for the Church of England, because what the Church of England is doing is, instead of buying into sanctity, which is what stained glass windows are about, they tell the story of the Bible and they depict holiness. It's buying into a Western secular trope that multiculturalism is great, refugees are great, Jesus is with multiculturalism and refugees, and actually he's not. The people who are coming into our country in boats are largely people who follow Mohammed and think that the Bible is a series of lies and Jesus is not the saviour of the world. The idea that Jesus is shepherding them beautifully into this country in order to continue the dilution of Christianity is actually quite nearly blasphemous. And the Church of England should not be putting up tributes to multiculturalism in its windows of its churches.
So the final question to both of you, is the established church bending too much to the current of the times? Father Ashington to start with.
Yeah.
Yes, it's sold out completely to a secular ideology of secular utopianism. It doesn't follow the Bible. It doesn't follow tradition. It's ashamed of its forebears and predecessors. It doesn't understand holiness. It's trying to gain credit for political correctness. And as such, it hardly qualifies to be a church in many respects.
Reverend James, the last word to you.
I don't think it always is, really, and I think it depends what you think church is. I always think church, Jesus is amazing. Church isn't always that good, and just don't get the two confused. That's how I tend to live. So that's what I try to remember when I get discouraged. But also I see some incredible things happening in and through the Church of England. So I'm afraid I'm a big supporter of it, despite some of our weaknesses.
Okay, thank you very much to you both. That was the Reverend James Treasure from Top Church and former chaplain to the Queen, Dr. Gavin Ashington. You're with GB News on TV, on DAB radio, and next we'll be discussing the actor Russell Brand getting censored on YouTube for allegedly spreading COVID misinformation. Now it's time for the check of the news headlines with Tamsin Roberts.
Calvin, thank you. It's 2:32. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister is standing by her tax-cutting plans in spite of acknowledging the government made mistakes in the handling of the mini-budget. Speaking to the BBC Sunday with Laura Koonsberg, Liz Truss defended the government's package and refused to rule out public spending cuts. Ms Truss also said the Cabinet was not informed in advance of plans to cut the top rate of tax and that it was a decision taken by Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng. The Prime Minister's comments come as the Tory party conference gets underway in Birmingham. Merseyside police have charged a 34-year-old man with the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell. Thomas Cashman is accused of killing the 9-year-old who was shot in her home in Liverpool in August. Cashman has also been charged with the attempted murder of Olivia's mother and convicted burglar Joseph Nee, who was chased into the property. A second man, 40-year-old Paul Russell, has been charged with assisting an offender. Both men will appear at Liverpool Magistrates Court on Monday. FIFA's president has called it a dark day for football after 125 people have died in a stampede at a match in Indonesia. Officers fired tear gas in an attempt to control crowds after supporters of the losing team invaded the pitch in the East Java province. As panic spread, thousands surged towards the stadium's exits. An investigation has been launched and the country's president has ordered the league to be halted. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russian forces have retreated from the key eastern town of Lyman. A video shared online shows Ukrainian soldiers celebrating. Hours before the retaking of the town, Russia's defence ministry announced it was pulling troops out of the area. The captures come just a day after President Putin proclaimed the annexation of nearly a fifth of Ukraine. The first official photograph of the King, the Queen Consort and the Prince and Princess of Wales has been released by Buckingham Palace. The picture was taken at the palace 10 days after the Queen's death as the King prepared to host a reception for world leaders. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Calvin will be back in just a moment.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
On radio,
and online. We're proud to be the People's Channel, Britain's
News channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, welcome to GB News with me, Calvin Robinson, on Real Britain. Now let's take a look at some of the tweets that have been coming through. Alice says, loving the show. Is it time to start a conversation at conference among real Conservatives about repealing the Equality Act as it is being used to decriminalise? It is a very harmful law. Faith, sex is shouted down for gender. How is that equal? It is an interesting proposition because the Equality Act is supposed to be a shield, it's supposed to be a defensive mechanism, but more often than not, we find it used as a weapon, as a sword. It's supposed to be there to protect minority groups from discrimination. However, there is some terminology within it that could be problematic. For example, the wording active discrimination. The idea that we can somehow put things in place that promote certain demographics rather than defending them. And that is where people think it isn't necessarily equal. Repealing it is troubling, though, because at some point we do need to have a method in law of defending people's rights to religion, defending people's rights to define their identity, and defending people's rights if they are disabled or if they are of a genuine minority group. How do they get protection under the law? So we'll be discussing some more of that later. But coming up, we also have Toby Young talking about the issue of free speech. The Free Speech Union was set up to protect people from being shut down, from being censored, from being silenced. But I hope we can somehow get to a time and a place where it's not necessarily needed. We'll get that very, very soon. Thank you to Toby Young, who's on his way now. The only surviving bomber aircraft which could carry nuclear bombs during the Cold War is on display at the Imperial War Museum in Cambridge. For several years, experts have been working on restoring the aircraft, which has a wingspan of 110 feet. During a photo call this week, veterans relived their memories of working on the Handley Page Victor aircraft. Our national reporter Theo Chikombwa went to meet them.
Built in 1959, the Handley Page Victor was used in the height of the Cold War. The bomber was operated by a skilled pilot defending the UK. Now it's the only one of its kind left in the world. This week, veterans who worked on the flight reunited for its unveiling after a 5-year restoration project.
I had some wonderful experiences flying this airplane because it was such a wonderful airplane and because we were in the forefront of the news at the time that I flew it. So I was very lucky, and it's a great thrill for me to see this airplane so being beautifully preserved, because it's a bit of our history. It's a bit of history which is fading into the distance now. So wonderful that the Imperial War Museum are preserving it in this way.
Like Jeremy, Bob was part of the team who were ready to be deployed with the Victor within 4 minutes.
Our job was to be launched or scrambled off standby, rush up to the northern approaches and link up with our Lightnings, the interceptors, and then chase and find the Russian Burs or whichever their aircraft were that were coming down through the Iceland-Faroes Gap.
But what does it take to restore a Cold War bomber? For 5 months this year, specialists worked on the aircraft, led by John and his team.
What we do is try to conserve objects for future generations, so they can use them as a reference point. That is one of the questions we always get asked, is this aircraft going to fly? No, we don't fly them because you'd have to change so many components on it, it would cease to be what it originally was. Now, we want people to become, children to come along in 30, 50 years' time to look at something and say, oh, that was the way it was made in the 1960s.
What was one of 3 designed to be Britain's first nuclear bombers is now here for all to see. An iconic aircraft for its shape, now part of British aviation history. The Comber, GB News.
The Conservative Party conference will be officially opened in Birmingham at 4 o'clock. I'll be heading up there straight after the show. Joining us live from Birmingham is GB News political correspondent Catherine Forster. Catherine, who will be speaking this afternoon?
So it will be kicking off with Penny Mordaunt, leader of the House of Commons. They're opening with tributes to Her Majesty the Queen. And goodness, Liz Truss has only been Prime Minister for less than 4 weeks. It will be 4 weeks tomorrow since she was announced as the winner of the Conservative leadership contest, and 4 weeks on Tuesday since the Queen asked her to form a government, and then 2 days later the Queen sadly died. It's really incredible, isn't it? So opening with tributes, there will be a minute's silence. There will be the national anthem. Of course, the Labour Party sang that last week, didn't they? There'd been some concern about how that might go down, but in the event, it went very, very well indeed. And then after that, there's lots of events, lots of fringe events, but in the main hall, delivering for more jobs, some of the Metro mayors. So there'll be Andy Street, Mayor of the West Midlands. There will be Jake Berry, who is now, of course, Conservative Party chair. Also, Ben Houchen. Then there will be events for the other nations, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales. The Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, is due to speak tomorrow, later in the afternoon. And of course, Liz Truss is not due to speak until Wednesday. She will be hoping for a good conference, although I have to say expectations of what that might be have dropped dramatically because, of course, the fiscal event, the mini budget, call it what you will, had such massive ramifications. It caused turmoil in the stock market and the bond markets. It caused £65 billion bailout from the Bank of England. It caused the pound to drop to its lowest rate for about 40 years. Of course, it did then come back up, but it did cause a lot of consternation, and of course it also led to these terrible results for the Conservative Party in the polls, up to a lead of 33 points for Labour. So although there is a sense of anticipation here, there's a lot of concern about the direction the party is going in, and no sign as yet that the Prime Minister has any inclination of changing course.
That's Catherine Forster, GB News political correspondent. Thank you very much for that. And in note to the fringe events, I will be speaking at 2 p.m. tomorrow at the Mallard event if people want to turn up to that. Now, comedian Russell Brand has left YouTube after one of his posts was censored due to allegedly spreading COVID misinformation on Tuesday. The 47-year-old went on to say his video about the changing narratives around COVID was taken down. He's moving to Rumble, where he will be live streaming weekdays for 1 hour. We have been officially censored by YouTube, Brand explained. Joining me now in the studio from the Free Speech Union is Toby Young himself. Toby, the left are starting to get it because they're getting censored too.
Yeah, that's true. PayPal, for instance, which deplatformed the Free Speech Union and the Daily Sceptic, and me personally, a couple of weeks ago, has also deplatformed, I think, the Socialist Workers' Party.
Right.
And in America, a couple of left-wing sites as well. And, you know, I mean, Russell Brand is kind of a political maverick, not really easy to identify on the left-right spectrum, but he's certainly, if you're going to put him on that spectrum, closer to the left than to the right. So, yeah, this is an example of, it isn't just people like us, Calvin, that are getting deplatformed,
Careful with
demonetised.
Putting me in the same group as you, Toby.
Sorry.
No, but maybe I'm being unfair and making this a left-right issue, but I used to think that the left were the ones that fought for free speech, and now it seems to only come from the right. Is it still a left-right issue?
Well, I think the left need to be concerned, and we see, you know, someone like Russell Brand is the canary in the mine shaft.
Yeah.
Ira Silver, the former head of the American Civil Liberties Union, which won a number of landmark First Amendment free speech victories in the US, enabling the civil rights movement to evolve and develop, march, protest, etc. Ira Glasser said that the problem with speech restrictions is that they're a bit like poison gas. You know, when the wind's blowing in a particular direction, it seems sensible to release the poison gas and, you know, decimate your enemy. But the problem is the wind can change, and that's something the left should be mindful of when celebrating the fact that people like me, and maybe not you, but me, are deplatformed or demonetized by, you know, big platforms like YouTube and Facebook.
But that's it, isn't it? Because you say things that people don't want to hear or people don't necessarily like, so they're happy when you get censored. But when people say things that they agree with, it's more difficult. Therefore, we should always protect everyone's free speech. But I want to talk about Russell Brand's case in particular, because it was taken down for misinformation. Now, clearly, the difference between misinformation and disinformation is intent, isn't it? In that he put out a video that had something incorrect in it, and he put out another video correcting himself. So he wasn't trying to spread disinformation. He wasn't trying to spread lies or untruths or mistruths, however you want to call it. He was telling his story, got something wrong, corrected himself.
Yeah. And what he got wrong was actually fairly minor in the grand scheme of things. He claimed, I think in a video at the beginning of September, that ivermectin, the controversial treatment for COVID-19, which people dispute. Is it effective? Is it ineffective? And there's a huge amount of controversy. And you're not allowed on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, possibly not even on GBNews.
Hey, the only time I've ever had Ofcom investigate me was for mentioning the word ivermectin.
So you're not allowed to praise ivermectin as a treatment, or even say it's even mildly effective as a treatment.
Not necessarily praise it, but you're not allowed to ask questions about it.
And so Russell Brand claimed in this original video, the one he later apologised for, that the National Institutes of Health in America had now approved ivermectin as a COVID-19 treatment, and that wasn't in fact the case. It's still being trialled, and I think some of the trials are being overseen by the National Institutes of Health, but that doesn't mean that they've concluded that ivermectin is now a safe and effective treatment for COVID-19. So he got that wrong. He claimed it had been approved by the Federal Drug Administration in the US, and it hasn't. But he immediately apologised. So I don't think anyone could accuse him of deliberately trying to spread misinformation, which is where it would fall into disinformation, as you said. But nonetheless, YouTube took down that video, gave him a strike, and effectively notified him that if he said anything like that again, his channel would be taken down. And as he pointed out in the video he made about this last week, there are plenty of other examples of people on the less sceptical side of the COVID-19 debate saying things which clearly aren't true. And he gave an example of an official, I think, of the Biden administration claiming that being vaccinated stopped the infection dead in its tracks, that being vaccinated was 100% effective against infection from COVID-19. And we now know, I mean, I don't think we'll get censured by Ofcom for saying this, we now know that it isn't 100%. The vaccines aren't 100% effective. But that video is still up on YouTube. That hasn't been taken down. And, you know, I think by any measure, that is a more misleading statement than anything he may have said. So
well, that's the issue, isn't it? It's consistency.
Double standards.
Surely, if you want to say you're taking something down for misinformation or disinformation, you do it across a blanket punishment across the board, or you don't do it at all. Is that not the case?
Yeah, I mean, we see these double standards all the time. You know, if you're pro-vaccine, if you are pro-lockdown, if you're in favour of masking and all the rest of it, you know, you're given far more latitude.
Yeah.
Platforms like YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, they're much more forgiving than if you're a sceptic, challenging the wisdom of the lockdown policy and associated restrictions, or questioning the efficacy and safety of the COVID-19 mRNA vaccines. You know, you're not allowed to dissent or get anything wrong on one side of the aisle. On the other side of the aisle, a lot more freedom.
But this is science, so these things change. So what's misinformation last week might not be misinformation this week. It might be factual evidence. So how do we navigate this area without? What I'm getting to is, can we get to a point where we don't need the Free Speech Union to battle for us?
Well, that would be nice, but I don't think it's coming anytime soon. I think there are just certain things now, certain sacred cows, which you're just not allowed to challenge in the mainstream, whether in the media or on big tech. You're not allowed to challenge the various shibboleths of woke orthodoxy. You're not allowed to challenge the idea that we're in the midst of a climate emergency and we need to get to net zero as quickly as possible to avert the crisis. You're not allowed to challenge more or less any orthodoxy in connection with the pandemic, the vaccines, and so forth. So, you know, if you stray into these, you know, hot button issues, and if you say something that challenges the kind of prevailing orthodoxy, then likelihood is you'll find yourself silenced, deplatformed, demonetized, cancelled. And that clearly we've got to do something about that. And that's why, in part, the Free Speech Union exists. It's why the Daily Sceptic exists, to challenge these sacred cows.
Because it sounds like blasphemy laws to me. It sounds like this is a cult. That was Toby Young from the Free Speech Union. Toby, thank you so much for explaining that to us. Now, earlier this week, Labour MP Rupa Huq was suspended from the party after calling Kwasi Kwarteng superficially black. Yesterday, the Chancellor was forced to tell the Daily Mirror that isn't me, after the publication used a picture of another man to illustrate a story about him. So does the progressive left have a racism problem? With me now to discuss this is former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards, and political commentator Dominique Samuels. I'm going to start with you, Dominique, because I know you've experienced, as have I, a lot of racism online. Where does it mostly come from?
as you can probably guess, it's mostly come from the left. And what is quite pernicious about the way the left express their racism is that they express their racism almost, benevolently, that, they care for you. They just want to know why you don't back your tribe, why you're betraying black people, why you're acting like a white person, without themselves realizing that those assumptions are race-based, they're race-based assumptions. And often it's this bigotry of low expectations, the expectation that if you're black, you must stay in your place. And we've seen that play out in the media with the left-wing media's treatment of people like Kwasi Kwarteng and most notably also Priti Patel as well.
What does that mean? You're acting like a white person.
I've had to deal with it so many times. They interpret acting like a white person as perhaps speaking properly, being well informed, acting a certain way. These people don't even realise that they are subconsciously only attributing sort of positive behavioural characteristics to this idea of being white. And if a non-white person, or particularly a black person, deviates from this expectation of what a black person should act like, all of a sudden they're not, really black, or they're betraying their tribe. But that is, of course, how the left operates. The left operates by allocating certain groups these protected characteristic sort of camps that they stay into. And if they step outside of their box, they're the enemy, essentially.
OK, Peter, I don't want to ask you to speak on behalf of the left, but I'll make it more specific to yourself. Do you think that black people can be right-wing?
Of course, black people can be right-wing or left-wing, just like white people could be left-wing or right-wing. I think, first we've just got to acknowledge what Ruth Bahak said this week was wrong, and Keir Starmer said the day after that it was wrong. I'm really wary of these kind of massive generalisations like, does the progressive left have a racism problem? There are elements, sadly, of racism in every element of society. It's a bit in education, in the media, in the British left, and in the right. And we know that Labour had a very pronounced problem regarding the Jewish community under Jeremy Corbyn. I think Keir Starmer's made great progress in that. And I know that Baroness Saida Vazi has spoken out about her experience of Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. But just as I think most people join the Conservative Party because they're patriotic and want to help the country, most people join the Labour Party for similar reasons. And sadly, there are pockets of really disgusting bigotry in every part of society. I think we should be open about that, but also try and be nuanced in the language we use.
Yeah, I mean, it is a generalisation, but it comes from somewhere. This idea that people, when we talk about racism, we often go straight to the far right, as in the old-fashioned racists who, I just don't like you because of the colour of your skin. But this is important to address because many people don't recognise this racism, this patronising racism, that if you're, like Dominique said, if you're portraying positive signs of, speaking properly, or if you're successful, or if you walk in a certain way, it's seen as a form of whiteness. So the left somehow, quite often, attribute positive traits as white and negative traits as black. And when someone like Kwasi Kwarteng is speaking properly, he's only superficially black. And the only reason I point it out from the left is because we're quite often quick to point out racism from the right, but it's not necessarily seen from the left. Do you recognise that there is this undercurrent of condescension that people should be belonging to certain tribes and should stick to their tribes?
Well, you say an undercurrent. Clearly, what you described has happened in all parts of society. I don't think the left is more condescending than the right. I think there's been.
Well, let's take it back to lived experiences then, because the left often talk about lived experience. And if I say my personal lived experience is that as a grown adult of mixed heritage, I experience the most of the racism that I experience today in the 21st century Britain is from the left, from that condescending tone that Dominique's just explained. I experience that all the time, and predominantly from the left. So let's acknowledge that.
Yeah, absolutely. If that's your experience, I would absolutely take that face value and wouldn't dream of questioning it. And, part of being a left-wing and a patriotic person is I try and put myself in the shoes of others, but that can be difficult to do. And at least, hopefully, we go into these issues in society knowing that it can be difficult to do, because I can I can know what it's like to be in the Church of England like you, but I can't know what it's like to be black. So I think, what you say, I wouldn't doubt for a moment.
Dominique, is that the problem right there? Is that the definition? I don't know what it's like to be black. We're all British, doesn't matter what our skin colour is. Surely our lived experiences shouldn't differ depending on our skin colour. Are we still focused too much on skin colour?
Yeah, I think we are too focused on skin colour, and I do think it comes from this idea about your lived experience and how your truth, your lived experience should dictate reality. And I think that's sort of where the left has been quite successful when it comes to racial politics, because they have this select group of people that have quite an extreme view of race relations, have quite an extreme view of Britain. If we're going to be specific, let's talk about Labour MP Rupert Hooke, who said that Kwasi Kwarteng was superficially black because he went to Eton, or your Dawn Butlers, your Diane Abbotts, those sorts of politicians, your David Lammies. They weaponise their skin colour and use that to hammer home quite extreme left-wing political points. And the reason why it's so successful is that this sort of racialised lived experience, my truth culture that we've cultivated is very deeply entrenched in our TV, our film, our mainstream media. So they've been very successful at this, and that's why most of this sort of left-wing racism isn't actually acknowledged. You've got someone on here who actually, I think, is sort of acknowledging it, but I would say he's in the minority. If you got someone on here that was, BLM, Extinction Rebellion,
Well, we've had enough of the BLM Extinction Rebellion lots, Dominique.
You probably wouldn't have, such contention.
As ever, you talk a lot of sense. I'm with you entirely, and we need to move past
all
this
those MPs have
discrimination.
experienced racism as well.
Thank you, Peter. That was former editor of Labour List Peter Edwards and political commentator Dominique Samuels talking a lot of sense, as she always does. You're watching Real Britain with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. Plenty more still to come. See you in a few.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens,
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
This is Real Britain on your TV, radio and online. The Conservative conference officially kicks off in under an hour. We'll be discussing Liz Truss's vision for the economy and her plans to relax migration laws. Do you think it's the right move? Also, we'll be shedding light on religious influencers using social media as a positive tool to educate others. And we have the parents Nigel and Sally Rowe in the studio to tell their story after winning a legal battle over transgender policies in schools. But first is the news with Tamsin Roberts.
Calvin, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 3. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister is standing by her tax-cutting plan in spite of acknowledging the government made mistakes in the handling of the mini-budget. Just a warning of flash photography coming up. Speaking to the BBC's Sunday with Laura Koonsberg, Liz Truss defended the government's package and refused to rule out public spending cuts. Ms Truss also said the Cabinet was not informed in advance of plans to abolish the top rate of tax and that it was a decision taken by Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng. The Prime Minister's comments come as the Tory party conference gets underway in Birmingham today amid economic fallout from the recent financial announcement.
Do you want to say to people, I understand their worries about what has happened this week, and I do stand by the package we announced, and I stand by the fact that we announced it quickly because we had to act. But I do accept we should have laid the ground better. I do accept that.
You accept you should have laid the ground better.
I have learnt from that. I have learnt from that, and I will make sure that in future we do a better job of laying the ground.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has refused to rule out real-term cuts in welfare payments, despite saying pensions would rise in line with inflation. Speaking in the same interview with the BBC, she was clear that she's committed to the triple lock, protecting them against price increases, not ruling out a reverse on Boris Johnson's promise to maintain the raise in benefit payments in line with inflation. She said Work and Pensions Secretary is looking at it. Merseyside police have charged a 34-year-old man with the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell. Thomas Cashman is accused of killing the 9-year-old who was shot in her home in Liverpool in August. Cashman has also been charged with the attempted murder of Olivia's mother and convicted burglar Joseph Nee, who was chased into the property. A second man, 40-year-old Paul Russell, has been charged with assisting an offender. Both men will appear in court on Monday. FIFA's president has called it a dark day for football after 125 people died in a stampede at a match in Indonesia. Officers fired tear gas in an attempt to control crowds after supporters of the losing team invaded the pitch in the East Java province. In a panic, thousands surged towards the stadium's exits. An investigation has been launched and the country's president has ordered the league to be halted. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russian forces have retreated from the key eastern town of Lyman. A video shared online shows Ukrainian soldiers announcing the capture outside the town council. Hours before the retaking of the town, Russia's defence ministry announced it was pulling troops out of the area. The capture has come just a day after President Putin proclaimed the annexation of nearly a fifth of Ukraine. King Charles will not be attending next month's COP27 climate change summit in Egypt. It's understood that after seeking advice from the government, it was mutually agreed that it wouldn't be the right decision for the king to make his first overseas visit as sovereign. Despite not attending the event in person, it's reported the king still hopes to contribute in some form. Meanwhile, the first official photograph of the King, the Queen Consort and the Prince and Princess of Wales has been released by Buckingham Palace. The picture was taken at the palace 10 days after the Queen's death as the King prepared to host a reception for world leaders. More than 40,000 people have taken part in the London Marathon today. It's the third time the 26.2-mile race has taken place in October after it was moved due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Organisers say it will return to its traditional spring slot next year. Great effort from everyone there. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Real Britain with Calvin Robinson.
Welcome to Real Britain with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. Here's what's coming up on the show. Immigration rules are set to be loosened as part of Liz Truss's mission to boost growth. The PM is expected to expand the government's shortage occupation list in order to help businesses who are in desperate need. So are we starting to pay the price for Brexit, is the question people might ask. Also, I'll be speaking to pollster Sir John Curtis after a handful of polls this week suggested the Conservative Party's popularity has taken a dive following the mini-budget. And we'll speak to a Christian family who have been awarded £22,000 in legal costs and a commitment from the government to reform transgender policies in primary schools following a 5-year legal battle after their son was labelled transphobic. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. I'd love to know your thoughts on the polls. Do take a chance and tweet us at GBViews, and you can email us at gbviews@gbnews. You can watch us online too. We're on YouTube, and don't forget Facebook. You'll find lots of brilliant content on the GB News page. Thank you. Stay tuned. The Conservative Party conference will officially be opened in less than an hour. Joining us live from Birmingham is GB News political correspondent Catherine Forster. Catherine, what are we expecting from the conference today?
So there's a lot of noise behind me. Anticipation is building. Lots of fringe events already underway, but begins really with Penny Mordaunt, leader of the House of Commons, at 4 o'clock with tributes to the Queen. There will be a 1-minute silence. Then they will be singing the national anthem. Obviously, although the Prime Minister has been in office less than 4 weeks, there's already rather a lot of unhappiness with the performance so far. She certainly hasn't had anything like a honeymoon period. And I was just talking to a Red Wall MP earlier who backed Liz Truss, but he was still very supportive. He was saying, yes, okay, it hasn't been messaged in the best way, but the policies are absolutely sound. And Liz Truss this morning was absolutely sticking to her guns, saying that she wasn't going to make changes. Also, I've been talking to some Conservative Party members who've come up from Cornwall. One of them said that she was Margaret Thatcher reborn, but the other one did acknowledge that there had been a bumpy start. So people that I've spoken to here so far, broadly happy, but within the party as a whole, that is a rather different picture. There is a lot of unhappiness. Obviously, the polls that put, one poll in particular that put Labour 33 points ahead is causing a lot of MPs to really worry about their jobs. And a lot of people are not here, Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson most noticeably. So a very interesting few days to come. Liz Truss will be hoping for a strong performance.
Thank you, Catherine Forster there, GB News political correspondent. Now, Liz Truss is expected to loosen immigration rules in an attempt to boost the economy amid growing fears of recession. Businesses, particularly in the hospitality sector, have been frustrated that the visa system for skilled work has not been responsive enough to alleviate the shortages they are experiencing. So, should the PM relax migration laws to bring in more workers? Joining me now live is Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, Stephen Wolfe, and immigration consultant Dean Morgan. Stephen, can the Tories ever claim to be tough on migration after this measure?
Absolutely not. And they've been failing to be tough on migration since their claims that they were going to make Brexit work and control migration. Yes, of course. They did implement some of the ideas, many of which I wrote in the Leave Means Leave paper, a fair, flexible, forward-thinking immigration system for the UK by having a system that analysed which type of working immigrants that we needed to have in which sort of industries. But this policy, the policy that Liz Truss is contemplating, opening up the doors once more to mass low-skilled migration, will do what we all knew before. That will reduce the wages of those who are poorest in this country. It will decrease GDP per capita, which also impacts the poorest in this country. It will make sure that there's crowding in areas where most of these people come, increasing housing costs, increasing the pressure on local services. It will do nothing to help the poor. It will do lots to help the rich. And when poor people are struggling to pay their bills, not getting inflationary wage rises, this is a disaster. And all Red Wall MPs should be looking at this and saying, wow, we may be losing our seats at the next general election.
Well, indeed, because if we look at Matt Goodwin's poll from today, 71% of Conservatives would support reducing net migration, 67% of Leave voters, 40% of all voters. So there seems to be a massive demand there for a reduction in immigration. Dean, what's your take on this?
Unfortunately, we've not been allowed to have an honest debate about immigration. I was listening to what you were saying earlier about racism and xenophobia, and I think our politicians have kind of failed us in the sense they haven't allowed us for many decades now to actually have an honest, open debate about the consequences of not having migration. I mean, the difference post-Brexit is, before Brexit, anyone from Europe could come here. Post-Brexit, there is a system, a company has to apply for a sponsor license. They have to request a certificate of sponsorship from the government. The government has total control over that. And should anyone, misbehave or kind of mishire people, then it's the manager that goes to jail. It's the manager that gets fined. It's not the owners, so they can't, pass it off between each other. But post-Brexit, the question that we need to answer: what happens to GDP in the coming years if we don't bring in the best and brightest from around the world? And, as soon as Brexit happened, we went through the immigration rules with a fine-tooth comb to try and work out what the changes were. And it was very clear that, I think the Brexiteers are going to be a little bit disappointed that it shifted from European migration to global migration. But low-skilled workers, not enough of them, medium-skilled, high-skilled, it used to just be high-skilled before Brexit. So what do we do if there's a GDP gap in the future? We've not been having enough children. And even if we started having children now to try and plug that gap, they would still take 20 years to enter the workforce.
Right.
So we need a policy that is going to help us to grow the economy. And I don't see that happening if we pull up the border. We do have control now as a country, and the government can set limits on the number of certificates of sponsorship it issues to UK employers.
But Dean, and Stephen, I'll come back to you on this shortly. But Dean, you mentioned we need a policy to fix this issue, but we're conflating many issues here. We've talked about having the best and brightest able to come here. Well, the government's put in place an Australian-style points-based system that many Brexiteers would have campaigned for. But what we're seeing today is that low-skilled workers are being re-designated as high-skilled individuals in order to get more immigration to fill the gaps of low-skilled workers. Surely a policy that better suits the British citizens would be to skill up British citizens to fulfil those roles, and we have mass unemployment that could lend those workers.
Okay, but I mean, is it a case that it's the government's responsibility to skill up the workers, or is it an individual's responsibility to try to better themselves and to get new skills and try to make themselves useful for the economy? I think the government is seen as like the be-all and end-all here. I think the government itself really needs to have a policy where we can do the brain drain on the rest of the world. I don't see how, again, training people, yes, there should be two policies here. A long-term policy where we encourage, the people that are living on this island or these islands to have children, because we need more. Otherwise, we're going to go down economically the way of Japan. Everyone can see what happens when you don't have migration in some form to try to fill in skill shortages. But at the same time, that takes time. What do we do at the moment? My clients are saying to me, whether they be a pub chain, whether they be, restaurants, they don't have enough people. No one's applying for their jobs.
Okay.
Do you force all the people that are on benefits and say, look, unless you're physically ill, you need to undertake these low-skilled jobs?
I mean, it's an argument to be made. Stephen, I'm going to come to you next because Dean's talked about falling birth rates, and we have seen this. But if we look at other countries like Hungary, Poland, where they're fixing this solution by having family-friendly policies, surely that's a better way than replacing the downfall in the British birth rate with immigration from countries that might have conflicting values to our own.
There's a conflation here between the birth rate. The birth rate of those people who were born in this country, home citizens, is indeed decreasing. But the birth rate last year of the number of children in the UK, just close to 1 million, 2/3 of those came from immigrant families that have already arrived here. So the immigrant families that have arrived, whether they're EU or non-EU citizens, are actually increasing the population of this country, which is declining, but at a slower rate. It's not declining enough to actually have such a major impact. The big issue that I agree with Dean is, what are we going to deal with some of the issues impacting employers? And it's funny that Dean talks about pub groups, because I'm talking exactly about one here. I'm talking about some pub groups here that I've been speaking to in this area, and they're paying £10.50 for people to work behind the bars. They can't get them. They're paying over 40, 50, 55,000 in some of the pubs to can't get those people who are working as chefs. And some of the big issues that faced is the vast number of 50-year-olds that left this economy during COVID. 1.5 million people in this country over 50 left. And secondly, they're not getting young people to come in. They don't see as many students anymore. And when you talk to students, they say, I don't need to work, because the system of grants that have been given to them means that they can travel and potentially never pay off those debts. So if we're looking at ways of improving our economy, yes, we need to train our own, but we also need to bring in a system where the tax system encourages those 50-year-olds to come back into the workplace, where you have tax systems to encourage students to come in and maybe impact that as well. It's not a one-fit-all in which this government seems to believe that we bring in mass immigration at low-skilled levels from across the world, because we do not get the benefit on GDP per capita. We might get it in GDP because you could bring in 10 million people or 20 million people, and that would improve GDP, but it won't improve the wealth of a lot of people on GDP per capita.
And the government's already given 1 million visas out this year, so surely we should have a surplus of labour. And let's not forget that immigration is in the top 3 main issues for pretty much most voters in every poll that we've seen so far. So, Dean, if we increase mass immigration even more, will this be the end of the Conservative government?
I think the sentiment out there, you know, we've got a cost of living disaster caused by not just this government, but many. We have a currency that's behaving like the worst, you know, altcoin going into a bear market. And so people out there, you know, are going to be exceptionally frustrated. It's going to be... It's easy to blame, as we know from history, you know, this problem on others. It's the migrants. It's their fault. I mean, thank God they are having children, as we've chosen not to. You know, it's very simple. But you know, we need to. But that's understandable why we've chosen not to, because you know, I lived in India for a year, massive families, but the cost of living over there, although the salaries, you know, are high, you know, are less, the cost of living is lower, so you can afford to have more children, or not always a choice. But the problem is, the cost of living here has got to a point where if you want to have 2, 3, 4 children, well, you're going to need to rely on the government unless you're exceptionally wealthy.
You make a decent point.
That problem, you know?
You make a decent point, but I think this is going to make things worse, isn't it? If the cost of living crisis is preventing people from starting families, more mass immigration is only going to make things worse. But thank you very much to both of you for a wonderful conversation. That is the director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, Stephen Wolfe, and immigration consultant, Dean Morgan. Plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain. Next, we'll be discussing the enormous lead Labour now hold over the Conservatives in the latest opinion polls and whether or not we should take any notice. But first, let's have a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry for most with some clear spells, but there'll be a few showers in parts of western Scotland. Let's take a look at the details. Skies will be clear across the southwest England this evening, and it'll turn chilly in the countryside as temperatures fall into single figures. Any cloud in southeast England will gradually melt away to leave clear skies this evening. A few mist and fog patches could form in the countryside. Dry this evening in Wales and turning cold across the country. A little mist may form in the valleys as the evening progresses. Mist and fog patches are also possible across the Midlands, particularly in the east. It will be a dry end to the day with starry skies and feeling chilly out there too. A few late showers will move into northwest England this evening, but most places should stay dry. Skies will be clear across the northeast with light winds. There could be a few late showers across southwest Scotland towards the end of the day, but many places will be dry, particularly in the east, where skies will be clear. A cloudier picture across Northern Ireland this evening, although many places will be dry. There could be just a few light showers around coastal areas at the end of the day. Apart from a few showers in the northwest tonight, most places will stay dry. There'll be increasing amounts of cloud in the northwest and some lingering fog patches in the south. And that is how the weather is shaping up overnight and into tomorrow morning.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. Labour now hold an enormous lead over the Tories in many of the latest opinion polls. The actual results vary from pollster to pollster, but all show a double-digit lead for Keir Starmer, with Liz Truss facing trouble after her mini-budget announcements. The projections predict a landslide for Labour after only 3 weeks of the Truss premiership, with many comparing the situation to the late 1990s, where Tony Blair crushed the Conservatives in his huge victory. To shed some light on this is pollster and Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University, Sir John Curtis. Sir John, thank you very much for joining us. Walk us through these opinion polls, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Could you talk us through what these polls have been saying?
Yeah, we've had a remarkable number of 9 opinion polls conducted effectively Wednesday, Thursday, in the wake of the difficulties that the UK faced in the financial markets, both with a decline in the value of the pound, albeit one that proved to be temporary, but what has proved to be more permanent is the rise in the borrowing costs for the government. So that clearly got a lot of adverse publicity and increasing concern about the potential impact on mortgages, including, of course, the difficulty of getting one. Anyway, those polls on average put the Conservatives 23 points behind Labour. Now, if we compare the position with that in the polls that were conducted just before last Friday week, i.e. just before the fiscal statement that the Chancellor quasi-Kwarteng made, at that point the Conservatives were 9 points behind. So over the course of a week, there has been as much as a 7-point swing from Conservative to Labour. Now, to give you some idea as to the scale of this, that is more or less in line with the swing that occurred in the month or so, but it did take a month, in the month or so after the Black Wednesday of September 1992, which is the last time a Conservative government got into trouble with the financial markets. In that case, it was unable to defend the value of the pound, but at that stage was pegged to the so-called European exchange rate mechanism. But in response to the immediate week, the swing was only actually 3.5 points. So the reaction is on a scale that's in line with Black Wednesday, but it's happened more quickly than the wake of Black Wednesday. And of course, the thing we have to bear in about Black Wednesday is that that government never recovered from that. The damage done to the government's reputation for economic competence, which has now also been done to this government, was never reversed, even though, again, this is worth bearing in mind, even though actually economic growth was pretty good after that, because actually the falling of the pound out of the exchange rate mechanism, the devaluation did the economy a lot of good. Okay, so there are some very, very clear warning signs here to the Conservatives that certainly they do not have to hope that the rest of Black Wednesday history doesn't go on to improve itself, to repeat itself.
Yes, thank you, Sir John. That raises several questions to me. It sounds like what you're saying here is that this is the Tories' game to lose. They're losing points, and those points are being made up by Labour, rather than Labour actually winning points on a policy-based platform. So does that mean that if the Tories are going to sink, it could potentially mean that a rise in the Lib Dems, a rise in the smaller parties? It's not necessarily the case that Labour are going to shoot to power.
Well, there are a couple of points to make on that. I think in truth is that most of the movement that's occurred in this Parliament, certainly over the course of the last 12 months, has been the result of self-inflicted wounds created by the Conservative Party itself. After all, until the Owen Paterson affair, now long since forgotten about, the Conservatives have never been behind Labour in the polls in this Parliament, and for the most part had usually been ahead. But first of all, Bowen Johnson tried to rescue Owen Paterson from being sanctioned by the House of Commons. Then, of course, came Partygate, and then for the first time, the Conservatives were consistently behind Labour in the polls. That eventually led to the downfall of Boris Johnson. But now, and that's something that the arrival of Liz Truss didn't do much to correct. There was very little in the way of a Liz Truss bounce. But now this government has again, basically, yes, self-inflicted wounds. Now, I mean, that said, I think what one has to say too is that, for whatever reason, it is Labour that have benefited over the course of the last week. Actually, support for the Liberal Democrats is down a couple of points. And that while I think certainly Sir Keir Starmer is certainly nothing like as popular as Tony Blair was, although his popularity and his approval rating has improved a bit in the course of this month, and not least, of course, because he had a relatively good party conference. But Labour are at least not... The electorate are no longer scared enough of the Labour Party, if one puts it that way, in the way that they were with Jeremy Corbyn. But if indeed the government does get itself into difficulty, then Labour do seem to be capable of profiting. And I think one other caveat to make is obviously, apart from the financial markets the last week, there was a Labour conference. Parties often get a bit of a bounce in the wake of their own conference, though not on the scale we have seen. So I certainly don't think we should be surprised if even if nothing happens, anymore happens, that Labour's lead in the polls comes down a bit. But don't expect it simply because of a bit of a poll bounce. It's going to go back to anything like parity between the two political parties.
Yeah, it absolutely sounds like this could be the result of a protest. It could be the result of people being fed up with Tory policy rather than necessarily in favour of Labour. But thank you for the insights. That was pollster and Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University, Sir John Curtis. You're with GB News on TV and on DAB radio, and next we'll be discussing the rise of religious influencers and how they're using social media as a positive tool to shed light and educate others on faith. Now it's time for a news check with Tatiana Sanchez.
Thank you, Calvin. It's 3:30. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister is standing by her tax-cutting plans in spite of acknowledging the government made mistakes in the handling of the mini-budget. A warning, the following contains flashing images. Speaking to the BBC Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg, Liz Truss defended the government's package and refused to rule out public spending cuts. Ms Truss also said the Cabinet was not informed in advance of plans to cut the top rate of tax and that it was a decision taken by Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng. The Prime Minister's comments come as the Tory party conference gets underway in Birmingham in half an hour's time. FIFA's president has called it a dark day for football after 125 people have died in a stampede at a match in Indonesia. Officers fired tear gas in an attempt to control crowds after supporters of the losing home team invaded the pitch in the East Java province. As panic spread, thousands surged towards the stadium's exits, where many suffocated. An investigation has been launched and the country's president has ordered the league to be halted. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russian forces have retreated from the eastern town of Lyman. A video shared online shows Ukrainian soldiers celebrating. Hours before the retaking of the town, Russia's defense ministry announced it was pulling troops out of the area amid threats of encirclement. The captures comes just a day after Putin proclaimed the annexation of nearly a fifth of Ukraine. Meanwhile, the first official photograph of the King, the Queen Consort and the Prince and Princess of Wales has been released by Buckingham Palace. The picture was taken at the palace 10 days after the Queen's death as the King prepared to host a reception for world leaders. TV online and DAB+ radio. Don't go anywhere. Calvin's back in a moment.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Now, on to the new viral sensation taking over social media, Orthodox Jewish choirs. Miami Boys Choir, a young Orthodox singing group, have made waves online after their videos were circulated on TikTok and making religious culture resonate with many who felt adrift from it. The upsurge in religious online content is comfort to many who feel the platform has done large damage to the traditional family and contributed to alienation. But many are now pushing back. I'm delighted to say one such star, Orthodox Jewish TikToker Melinda Strauss, who boasts an impressive 650,000 followers, joins me now. Melinda, thank you very much for joining me. Why do you think there's a growing interest in religious TikToks?
You know, it's interesting. I think that with TikTok,
becoming such a big thing. People were so bored at home for a little while, and they were just curious. And there's so much unknown about religion. I think also that there's so much negativity about religion, and because of that, people just want to know more. They want to understand it. One of the things that I learned early on when I was posting about being an Orthodox Jew is that people know nothing. They know absolutely zero about Orthodox Judaism. They maybe have a few ideas of something they heard on the news somewhere, but they don't really know much about us and our just day-to-day activities. My entire life is led by being an Orthodox Jew, by being a Jewish person. And for a lot of people, they don't really have an understanding of what that looks like. They have a basic understanding, again, of some stereotypical things they've seen, or maybe a Netflix show that's out, but they don't know what our real day-to-day looks like, and they just want to know more.
I love that you said your life is led by being an Orthodox Jew, especially in a time of identity politics. People should at least recognize that and respect that. But do you find the opposite? How are the comment sections on your videos?
They're interesting. Sometimes, I would say that it's a majority positive. And I want to lead with that because that's what keeps me going every single day, is knowing that people are so interested and they just want more and more questions. And I have this thing that I always say, there are no stupid questions. And I really believe that, because I think that if people don't actually ask the questions that they're thinking, then they're never going to get the answer. They're always going to make up some version of it in their mind. And if you have a question, it means somebody else has it too. I also get a lot of negativity. I get a lot of anti-Semitic comments, a lot of people who tell me I'm acting like a victim in my life, which I never lived my life like that. So I always find that really strange. But there are a lot of people who just will come on and say negative things about Judaism, about religion in general. They'll call it a cult. They'll say things like that. But I just feel like instead of addressing that, I keep moving forward with the positive and answering questions. And that's what I focus on.
I like the encouragement of positivity and just ignoring the negativity. That's a good approach. I used to do that as a teacher. I think it helps with that young mindset that we see on TikTok. But I would suggest that TikTok is actually cultural subversion from communist China, and it's put out there to promote ideologies that are harmful to Western life, harmful to British culture. Would you accept that criticism of TikTok, and is that part of the reason that you're on it, in order to provide an alternative perspective?
I think it's possible. I think there's so many things that we don't know about this app. There's so many mysteries of TikTok, where I feel like the other apps, while we don't always love things that are happening on Facebook and Instagram or even on YouTube, we know what's behind it. And there's so much unknown about TikTok. When I first started sharing, it was because I was seeing so much negativity, and there was a lot of anti-Semitism happening around me. I live in New York, and there was just a increase that was really scaring me. And I felt like if a few people were following me and I was able to share about my life with them and educate them, then I was doing something good, because I believe that hate comes from ignorance. So if I could educate some people, then I could teach them more about us, and there would be less hate towards religion, and specifically hate towards Jews, and hopefully less anti-Semitism.
So do you recommend other religious groups do the same as what you're doing and be more active on social media?
Absolutely. And from my own people, from my own friends, I'm always encouraging them to come on and share. I love watching people of other religions and other cultures on TikTok. I have learned so much. And the reality is there's so much I didn't know before, and so much I still don't know. So when I see the nuns who come on TikTok and who are sharing about their life, or Muslims who come on and share about their life, I love to listen and to ask questions the same way people come to me.
And education is important. I'm absolutely with you on that. But religious intolerance is probably at a higher stage than it's been in a long time. Just by dressing in my cassock today, I know as soon as I get home and look on Twitter, there'll be lots of nasty responses. What are your tips for people, if we're saying young people should get on social media and promote their faith, what are your tips for them in order to avoid the horrible side of it?
You can't. That's tip number one, is you actually cannot avoid it. So if you're going to go on and share, just be ready for people to come on and say negative things. I'm ready for it every single day. I feel like if you all you talk about is negativity, then more negativity is going to come your way. So I choose instead to focus, like we talked about, on the education and the positive. Sometimes I will have to address something, especially when it's Holocaust denial or Holocaust jokes, and some extreme anti-Semitism. Recently, I had some swastikas posted on my page. That was pretty intense. But anyone who's coming on to talk about their religion, just know you're going to get hate. But don't let that stop you, because the hate is the reason you have to keep going.
And to refer to scripture, he was hated first. He was hated more than all of us. So that's a good point to make. The Miami Boys Choir, in particular, we got you on to discuss this. Can you tell us what makes them a success?
Oh my gosh. Well, I've been listening to the Miami Boys Choir since I'm a kid. There's so many different choirs and boys and girls that are out there singing. And what I love about it is that it's so positive. You're not going to see any negative videos about it. I haven't seen any negative videos about it, which I think is really awesome. I think that people are just looking for fun. As much as there's so much toxicity on TikTok, sometimes people just want to have a good time and they just want to smile and they want to laugh. And I think that these boys are giving people the opportunity. And it's just an old video, right? But then you're seeing the kids coming out and they're adults now and they're making new videos and it's just bringing people joy. And they want more of that. I can't say that it's always going to be like this, but especially with religion, but I'm living in the moment because why not? Like, it just feels good to enjoy the positivity coming from the Hebrew words they're singing, and they're beautiful words they're singing, and just the joy that they're bringing to the internet. It's great.
And as far as I've seen from the Christian side of social media, there's a lot of apostasy, there's a lot of heresy, and there's a lot of mistakes and errors. Is it better to have that than to have nothing, or do you have a way of promoting orthodoxy?
I'm not sure what you mean by that question.
So people that would promote your faith, but in a way of misinformation, that would put false truths or false information out there about your Jewish faith.
Very interesting. I think that everybody's going to do what they have to do to share. I can't tell somebody that they're right or wrong. I don't like to go on and argue with other Jewish people and say, you're wrong. Maybe sometimes privately I'll talk to someone about it, but there's no one opinion about being Jewish. There's no one right way to live. So for people to come on and share their life, it's fantastic. If I see them doing it differently, their way isn't less valid because of the way I live mine. And we don't proselytize in Judaism. That's not our way. I will say I have seen once in a while someone Jewish will come on and do that. Yeah, I'll message them privately because I think it's an important thing to share, but it's not my business to tell anybody else how to live their life. The same way that I, for myself, don't expect people to come and tell me that I'm right or wrong.
That's a very interesting take. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for your positivity. Please keep it up. That was Orthodox Jewish TikToker Melinda Strauss. Now, a Christian family has had their appeal settled and a commitment from the government to transform or reform transgender policies in primary schools following a 5-year legal battle. Nigel and his wife Sally Rowe had taken action against the Department for Education after their 6-year-old son was labelled transphobic, 6 years old, I repeat, by a Church of England primary school for refusing to agree with trans-affirming policies. With me now are the parents in question, Nigel and Sally Rowe. First of all, thank you so much for joining me in the studio.
Thank you very much for having us. Yeah,
how on earth can a 6-year-old be transphobic?
Exactly.
A 6-year-old doesn't have the cognitive ability to work those sort of things out, does it?
No.
And that's why this is so utterly ridiculous. But let's also just remember this was a Church of England school.
Okay.
And for me, the greatest tragedy is that the church affirmed this. And Justin Welby's, seeing children, I can't remember how he puts it, but valuing all God's children. Well, if we truly want to value all God's children, we certainly don't affirm these ideologies at such a young age. And it's really tragic. But thankfully, the government, specifically Suella Braverman, who was the Attorney General, she seems to be in agreement with us. So this is a wonderful turning point.
Yeah. And as Christians yourselves, I assume you sent your son to a Christian school thinking it would be biblically orthodox and promoting truth as you know it, as you understand it. Was that the case?
Absolutely. We are committed Christians. We believe in biblical truth. We believe that, for example, marriage between one man and one woman, that sort of thing. We believe that God created them male and female. In fact, Jesus himself said in Matthew 19, don't forget, I created them male and female, and how it all works together for society and culture. And the family is fundamental to a culture, the nuclear family. Of course, this is being destroyed and broken, and we're beginning to see, I think, the ramifications of that in the culture. But we as Christians believe that, no, a boy is a boy and a girl is a girl. We don't deny the fact that there will be children that will suffer from gender dysphoria. There are those issues, and there are pathological issues that you can have, but fundamentally, we as Christians know that God created them male and female.
Right, and I want to speak on the kindness and compassion, because some people will be watching this thinking, that's very unkind. If a child wants to declare that they are transgender, then that's up to them, and we should affirm and support them. But surely there are other ways of supporting a child who's going through gender dysphoria. Surely there are other avenues to be compassionate.
Absolutely, and I think what we've actually collated lots and lots of evidence that if you affirm that child in a school setting, it's actually very damaging to even the child, let alone all the other children. It's very confusing. It's not the kind thing to do, and it can send them on a trajectory where they are taking puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, which makes them sterile, and then into surgery. And if all the trusted adults in their lives are affirming them, then they begin to believe that. And from the evidence, it is actually the loving thing to do, the caring thing to do is to do it outside the school setting, give them the one-to-one help. Often there is very, very good reasons why they're confused. It could be so simple as well. Yeah. And if that child gets the due care and attention that they need, often these things are ironed out.
Well, there are those like myself, Sally, who would say that putting a child on puberty blockers is child abuse, because a child cannot change their gender, they can't consent, and they're not old enough to discern that yet. However, there will be people that will say, actually, no, that's fair enough, and they do feel like they are trans. That's an argument to be made. But in a Church of England school, when a 6-year-old identifies as a boy and doesn't necessarily understand that there's a different ideology, and he's promoting the Christian ideology that man made them male, God made them male, God made them female, and that God made them in his own image. If a child is promoting a Christian value in a Christian school, surely that should be acceptable even to the people that have a different perspective.
And that's why I think it causes distress to some children. For example, our children are brought up at home with Christian values. Right. And so therefore, when they go to school, they find they're in a battle. And they're in a battle not only with, some teachers, but they're in a battle with other children who are coming out with a different ideology, if you like. And it makes it very difficult for children. I'm 6-year-olds. Yeah. I mean, it's so young. What does a 6-year-old know? A child at 6 at school should be learning maths, science, things, doing those things, playing, all those things. Do we really want to start pursuing these ideologies of transgenderism?
That's a battle of values, and at 6 years old, how do they decide whether it's the parents' values or the teachers' values that they take on board? Indeed. Surely that comes back to why you chose that particular school to send your child to, because you assumed they'd have your values.
Absolutely. Yeah. Being a Church of England school, it's fundamental, should have a biblical foundation to everything, in fact.
Yeah, and I think this was the shocking thing. When we received the letter from the school, it was, you are transphobic, and we just thought, there's no support. We even contacted the local diocese and they showed no support either. And I think we were shocked when we did speak out about it, because we thought this needs to be clarified in law, and we need to be protecting young children. The church, on the whole, was silent, and some were even openly against us. And I think that's what we found so shocking and devastating. It grieved us.
I'm sure that the local diocese would disagree with that, but if you're not getting support from the diocese, where can other Christians go? Like, if you're speaking to other parents right now and they're not getting support from their local priest or their bishop, where can they go?
Yeah, well, that is one of the problems. Where can they go? You see, ultimately, the church should be the bastion of a moral foundation, shouldn't it, in a society? And this is but even if in the secular world, I think they often have greater respect for people in the church who say, no, actually, we stand on these values. These are the biblical values we stand on. You may not agree with it, but these are the values that we stand with as Christians and in Christian schools.
But it wasn't rhetorical, Nigel. I mean, generally, where did you go for support? Who did help you? What organisations can people reach out to? Well, there will be many people across the country who's in a very similar situation.
It's a very lonely place. It is a very lonely place. And actually, many people we had had fellowship for years didn't support us. I think this is what was such a shock. However, there are pockets of Christians all around the UK and all around the world, and specifically, actually, the Christian Concern who supported us. They've been incredible, and I love them to bits. Yeah. And we found that it was nice to spend time with them because they understood biblical truth. And so it was very comforting. So we didn't feel alone anymore. And of course, they've been supporting us over the last 5-6 years over this case. It's been a long time.
We would encourage, actually, if anyone is in this similar situation, to contact them, because they stand all the way through. They're steadfast, they're supportive. They've been amazing support. They're like family to us now, aren't they?
They are. They are. I can vouch for them. They're a fantastic organisation. They do a lot of good work. What's the current situation with your son's school?
We homeschool.
Okay.
We don't know exactly what's going in school, so we actually now homeschool. I think we've upset the education establishment, if not probably the Church of England as well. You know, the Department of Education, if you like, from the education side. So we're not particularly popular, but that's to be expected. You know, Jesus said, "Remember, when they hate you, they hated me first."
Yes, that's the quote I was trying to say earlier. Thank you.
You were.
Yeah. And actually, to encourage parents, homeschooling has been absolutely amazing for our boys. We're a part of a good community as well, and they have thrived, and it's been very fruitful for them. They're blossoming and growing, so it's been amazing.
We've got time for one short answer. Okay. Homeschooling is something I very much promote because you cannot rely on the schools not to have a political ideology these days. Where can parents go to if they want to start homeschooling their own children?
Pass on to Sally.
There's Chess, that are a good organisation. There's Classical Conversations. They're also a very good organisations. There's a couple there.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
God bless you both. That was parents Nigel and Sally Rowe. The Times reported last week that Whitehall officials said that guidance for schools on transgender issues is being developed by the department in conjunction with the Equality and Human Rights Commission, with a view to undertaking a public consultation on draft guidance. Lots of you have been getting in touch today about Christian persecution. Andy says, "I can barely believe what I have just seen on national TV. A piece on persecuted Christians, the Open Doors charity, and some real live Christian prayer. I had assumed all of this was illegal to broadcast, judging by the one-eyed output of other channels. Thank you, and very well done. Keep up the excellent work." Thank you yourself, Andy. God bless you. Len says, "The media need to talk about religious persecution more. They deliberately ignore anything that doesn't fit their narrative. Let people pray in peace." Hear, hear. And Andrew says, "Congratulations to Calvin Robinson for bringing up the importance of the persecution of Christians abroad and intolerance at home. It's not congratulations to me, it's all glory to God, and we are just here to promote the good news." Robert also says, what we require is increased productivity per capita, not to import more workers to reduce productivity." Crazy. Yeah, it's common sense, isn't it? On free speech, Melanie says, "The big people are taking away our freedom to decide for ourselves." Happens a lot these days. We live in a more and more authoritarian regime. On religious attire, Kathy says, "You should wear what you like. I'm not a member of any mainstream belief system, yet I wish folks would just chill out with each other." Absolutely. Thank you, Catherine. As I pointed out at the beginning, it does seem to me that certain attire is allowed, but Christians are always to be denigrated. Thank you, Catherine. Now, first of all, I just want to say thank you very much for tuning in and watching. Some of you might have been expecting my Common Sense Crusade. That will launch next week, 2 till 4 on Sundays, every Sunday, Calvin Robinson's Common Sense Crusade. So thank you for that. And over now to the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham, which officially opens very shortly. In the next few minutes, we'll be expecting a minute's silence to be held in tribute to the late Queen before the first speeches commence. Joining us live from Birmingham is GB News political correspondent Catherine Forster. Catherine, the conference will be opened with several tributes to Queen Elizabeth II.
Yes, that's right. Just a couple of minutes now until conference officially opens. Of course, people have been gathering here all day. Events have already been taking place, but it is due to begin in just a couple of moments. There will be, with tributes to Her Majesty the Queen, there will be a video, there will be a minute's silence. They will play the national anthem. Of course, Labour at their party conference did sing the national anthem for the first time in their history. This is going to be a difficult conference for the Conservative Party. Obviously, not even a month since Liz Truss became Prime Minister, but at the beginning, they will want to have a sense of unity. The party will come together for this moment. It's less than 4 weeks since Liz Truss was asked by Her late Majesty the Queen to form a government up in Balmoral, and only 2 days after that she died. Liz Truss has had a very bumpy start, but it does feel, doesn't it, like the world has changed since that time. We're just waiting now. All the cabinet ministers have been coming in the backstage entrance, which is just immediately at the back of the studio behind the camera where I'm talking to you from. Sense of anticipation.
This won't start on time. Are there any notable absences in the audience today?
Oh, most certainly there are. Yes, Rishi Sunak made it clear several days ago that he would not be attending. It was said that he was going to allow Liz Truss the space to own the moment. Make of that what you will. Also, Boris Johnson not here either. Mel Stride, chair of the Treasury Select Committee, not here. Sajid Javid not here. So many of the Sunak supporters or other leadership candidates who didn't ultimately get the job have chosen to stay away. But somebody who is here and is not very happy with the direction of the government is Michael Gove, of course, a very prominent
I understand Michael Gove speaking at a lot of fringe events this year.
Long ago. He's speaking at least 7 fringe events, to my knowledge. I was just talking to some Conservative members earlier who had already been to hear him speak, and he's not pulling any punches. He was on television this morning. Obviously, the Prime Minister was on television defending her plan, basically doubling down, saying that there was going to be no turning, no deviating, though she did accept that it could have been presented better. But Michael Gove immediately after that said very strongly that he didn't believe that the plans were conservative. And
absolutely.
really
and Catherine, I'm going to pop on a train up there as soon as I get off air. What is the atmosphere like at conference at the moment this year?
Well, obviously there's a lot of concern, but talking to MPs so far, the ones I've happened to bump into since I arrived have been supporters of Liz Truss, and they are holding firm. They are admitting that yes, it hasn't been well presented, yes, there have been missteps, but they do believe fundamentally that she does have the right policies. And it is, after all, just one poll. Well, it's been several polls, a 33% lead for Labour being the worst of them for the Conservatives. But of course, we are potentially 2 years or just over 2 years to a general election. So they believe there's plenty of time to turn this around. Of course, not everybody thinks so. Those polls are very unusual and make for really sobering reading on some projections.
Traditionally at conference we'd see a split. In Margaret Thatcher's day it would be between the sound and the wets. In my time it's between the Tory Reform Group and the Conservative Way Forward, the right of the party and the left of the party. Are you seeing a divide at the moment between the Conservatives that are there? Are people feeling very differently about the impact of these polls?
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, we have had some quite prominent people come out saying that these plans are wrong. Not just Michael Gove, he's been speaking about the One Nation Conservatives, and they think that this is anything but the levelling up that was promised, this support of the people at the top. It does seem that the right of the party is certainly in the ascendancy at the moment. Liz Truss is significantly more right-wing than Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson was quite ideologically flexible, really. Dominic Cummings, his former chief of advisor and sort of nemesis, used to call him the trolley because it was quite hard for Labour to pin down where he was going because he would change depending on what he thought was popular. Liz Truss, as we've already seen, doesn't seem to have any concern with being popular, as we saw when she spoke just over a week ago at the top of the Empire State Building. She said she was prepared to do things that were unpopular, and so it is proving at the moment. Of course, the announcements have been made. We haven't had chance to see how these will play out, but she and the Chancellor are absolutely convinced that this is the way forward, that this is the way to get Britain growing, to make Britain more prosperous.
And it's interesting that
a lot of people
describe Liz Truss as more right-wing as well, because there are those in the party that would say, actually, she's quite a neoliberal. She might be right economically, but not socially. And then there are many people in the Conservative Party who would describe themselves as small c. We're seeing members of the cabinet coming out across the front bench there, so I suspect we'll be going to them shortly. But how is this divide manifesting itself? Is there hostility, or is everyone quite jovial and united?
Well, so far the people that I've seen seem to be quite upbeat, but I think what's significant is the number of people that are staying away, that Sunak